Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and no special intro today. Just wanted to jump in and say hi to you guys and kind of take some time to catch up with you. I haven't done this in a little while, where I've just sat in front of the mic and talked for a little while, aside from a few extra places, which I guess I'll talk about here in a little bit. But today, I wanted to at least discuss where we're going, where I want to take the channel, what topics I want to do, and of course some news. We haven't discussed the news in a little while, and I still think it is relevant for even a lore channel to sort of talk about topics like it. But before I get into the news, let's talk about where the channel is going, and before I even get into that, quite frankly, let me talk about a couple things I don't usually plug here on the channel. The first is our Discord channel. The Discord has been kind of going strong here for the last little while. I think we're now over about 360 people that are on there. Not that everybody participates, but we do have a tight-knit little group over there, and I would definitely like it if you guys could come over and say hi. Second, in case you guys don't know about it, I'm on a podcast for anywhere from 2 to 5 hours a week, and that is called Focus Fire Chat. I sit down with my buddies Blue Crew 86 and Green Eyed Music Lover, and a couple others now and again when they decide that they can, have the time that they can jump on. I guess I shouldn't say time, more so, hey, I've got an opening. I know that one all too well. But in case you guys are looking for anything more from me and looking for additional thoughts here on the world of Destiny, that's a place that you can go ahead and find it. I know Blue posts everything here to YouTube. He also has a couple things with Podbean, and we also have a live chat that we do every Friday night. So pretty well every Friday you can come out and say hi. One of our more recent chats that we did, Blue and I actually sat down with John Goff, the guy that actually wrote up the stories for both Last Word and Thorn and several other little key moments that we have within Destiny, and had a chat with him. We talked about things like Marvel and Star Wars, especially the little trailer that they dropped for us, and of course we ended up digging into a little bit of Destiny and the philosophy behind it, what he kind of goes with, etc. That little chat I'll leave below because, one, it's not necessarily indicative of anything that we usually do on the show, but I think it is kind of a fun little chat to just sit and have in the background. Third, you may also know that Patreon went through a couple of different things that were kind of crazy, and they now have a tiered system that's in place for those to either pay for tiers or do something else. I made one, I'm not publicizing it, but I'm letting you guys know that in the near future, possibly after Guardian Con or otherwise, I may make some kind of announcement about it. I don't know. Just don't go looking for it. It's not necessarily out there. I haven't done much with it, but I wanted to let you guys know that in the future, I may finally start the ideas of crowdfunding. Not that I'm entirely for it, but I understand the need for it. Alright, with that all out of the way, let's talk about what direction I want to take everything here on the channel. First, we just got done a rather long series that lasted over about a month's time for me to get everything done that I had planned. Every single video that I did, I kind of pulled a George Lucas here, if you will, and I liked how it played out. There were a lot of different elements that sort of played into how the Drifter and then the Nine sort of handled and went here on the channel. We went from a introduction to the Drifter and how he is effectively who he is today. We went then into why I would support one faction over the other. And then we looked back in onto the Nine, and we started to look back on old theories a little bit as well as newer ones and try to decipher more of this puzzle that is the Nine and what could be going on with them. That's more the way I want to take things. I want to go with this episodic content idea with maybe a few stories and little intermixings there from time to time. And so that's why I want to look into doing the same thing with the Black Armory. The Black Armory is definitely going to be our next topic. There are way too many elements within it that actually tie back to what we've seen within Destiny. There are far too many connections with the collapse and so on, things that I've cared about because I'm a bit more of a historian. But not so much a historian that just repeats things back to you. No, I want to make sure that you guys see other elements or start to think differently in terms of how the stories develop or what it is that they may be working with or building these stories off of, etc. If you need any kind of related material, of course, you can look back at our elements with the Nine and how I related them back to Lovecraft and the Old Gods. Just to name one element or idea that we've done. That being said, though, there was this weapon that ended up dropping just a little bit ago, and I want to talk about that in another spot here later on in the video as well for a different reason, but of course Outbreak Perfected ended up being released, and there's a lot of stuff that we could kind of extrapolate from there. I made a list over on Twitter about the directions that we can effectively go with this. It could be on the Fallen themselves, it could be on Varix alone, it could be on Siva, it could end up being why Siva is gone and dead and done, it could be how this gun ended up just perfecting itself on its own, it could be about Rahul, who now has my vault from Destiny 1 and he's been keeping it from me this whole time. So many elements that we could effectively take from one entry and one weapon, and really from one mission. I know I'm forgetting a few others, like, oh yeah, the one major one. Why in the heck are the Fallen so spread out in our city? I think after my small stint with whichever direction or directions I decide to go with the Outbreak Perfected weapon, that'll end up leading us into what I want to cover with the Black Armory. That said, I've basically got about a month to month and a half, I think, to get that all out to you, so we'll see how quickly I can power through that. But with those pieces out of the way, there have been a lot of things that have cropped up over the last several months that I wanted to talk about earlier on, but just did not have the ability to do so. I ended up focusing so heavily on what content to create, or just sitting and reading and researching and recording and so on. That's basically what led me to where I was with the Drifter and such. But before I get too derailed here, this leads all the way back towards something with January, I think it was, back when Bungie ended up splitting from Activision. There are several questions that kind of lead from this, like, of course, who is backing them at this point, or where is the money going, who is it that we're ending up supporting right now, and I know that there have been plenty that have talked about this subject to really dig into that matter. I will say that I'm a little bit apprehensive about what things are going to happen, but it's more hopeful, I think, than apprehensive. To explain why I think so, largely, Bungie has shown that they've wanted to go in one direction, but then seemingly they end up getting pushed into another. This has always been the thing with Destiny, and the thing that I think has always kind of driven me a little nuts. They have two teams that they've set up within the building process for the game. The first is the launch team, and this, at least this time, was like Mark Noseworthy, Luke Smith, and a few other guys behind that. Plus, of course, some of the main writers and ones that have been with it since at least the beginning of Destiny as a whole. This is what led us to the Destiny 2 launch, and when we quickly started to see that things were not going the direction that we very much expected they wanted to. It felt more like Halo than it did like Destiny, and that's one thing that I think was kind of a force to push me away from the game as much as it kind of did in the early days. Even Destiny Vanilla, I think, felt better, ran a little better than what we ended up having with the original launch of Vanilla Destiny 2. That's, at least, of course, opinionated and so on, but that's just me. We still had story elements that were there. We still had things that were kind of evolving and changing with time, certainly, but they were definitely not the direction we expected to go. Things felt like they were going more in a happy cutesy style way, and then all of a sudden, Forsaken came out. Forsaken showcased something that I think is the turning point in what the community has finally voiced to say this is the direction we would like to see it go. It's the culmination of all of that stuff happening at one time or another. To explain further what I mean, there were voice lines that had caught that Cade was shot and killed or whatnot even before we had Forsaken come out. I know this was something that Planet Destiny and a couple others had covered back in the day, but data miners had found these lines and they were seemingly omitted from the game. Now, one thing we're never going to know is if this direction with Forsaken was exactly how they wanted to plan things out, or if it was the let's turn things on its head and just rewrite everything because what we've got planned isn't going to work. And I almost want to say it's more of the latter, thanks to how we ended up seeing Warmind play out. Warmind was this really weird feel from what we had with Curse of Osiris, where things seemed to be going more in that darker tone. I feel like I'm just giving a synopsis of how Destiny 2 has kind of grown and changed over the years, but I think it's important to understand because of what happens next. Shortly after Black Armory's release, we ended up hearing, I think it was pretty well in January or February, that some larger names were starting to leave. I'm not going to go into those names in particular, but they were names that have been around for Bungie either since Bungie was Bungie with Microsoft, or since the later days or early days of Destiny itself. And this was very key and important because, well, all of a sudden we're having some of this leadership go away. Where does this leave us? I don't think it hit home heavily until I ended up seeing the one about Jill Shar leaving. Jill was one of the senior writers that were over at Bungie, or I believe the only one that's over there. I don't know. Their titles are weird and they always have something different over with Bungie. They don't follow the same things there as some other studios do, and I'm sure it's mishmashed and changed depending on which studio you go and look into. But Jill held the title of senior writer. She's been on for about 4 years, which would end up putting her about year 2 with Destiny, or you could end up arguing that this was either Taken King, or you could end up arguing that this was very early days with Destiny as a whole, but she was one that was, in particular, there for the sake of writing up a lot of newer stories that we had. One big piece, though, before I get too tangential here and lose my mind, she was largely in command of the Iron Lords. She wrote up a ton of stories, ones of which we may never end up getting a hold of at this point, thanks to the fact that she's no longer with Bungie, but she's the one that's largely in charge of that stuff. She wrote up stuff for Aphrodite, she had inclusions for her, and so on. But I bring up Jill for a couple of reasons. One, we know who replaced her, and 2, we know that things aren't necessarily there due to cuts. And this is where I think it's important to understand where Bungie as a whole kind of is with Destiny and what the future may look like. Some will spout doom and gloom. I, on the other hand, will end up saying that this showcases some layer of hope. What we ended up receiving with Destiny 2's vanilla launch was a mishmash of things that we definitely did not want to see. There were guys that were in charge of game direction or raid direction and so on that, well, the community has voiced several times to say, no, we really don't want it this way. Feasibly, that was what might have happened with Destiny 3. We don't know for sure, but that was what was going on with the rumor mill. If this is effectively where the guys at Bungie wanted to take us, where they said, no, things didn't work with vanilla Destiny 2 before and the community kind of didn't like it, but now we're going to go ahead and start, doing the same thing with Destiny 3 and it'll work this time. Can I explain to you guys the definition of insanity? We don't know necessarily what's going on over at Bungie, and I don't claim to know exactly what's happening. I don't think that a lot of journalists, quite frankly, claim that they know what is happening, considering that they get little things wrong, like calling Jill the lead writer. She was a senior writer, and there's some differences that kind of go into that, because there is an actual lead writer over at Bungie. Anyway, I'm not going to harp on that too long, but I've just been less than impressed with a lot of the coverage that's been going on in games journalism lately before I really get involved in all of that. My point is, if we're having some people within Bungie itself effectively showcase that they want to do the same thing that Destiny 2 did in early days, we've already voiced that we don't necessarily like that, then yes, I would say it's time for those people to go. Respectfully. Not in a let's fire them sort of way. I would have been happy if they stayed on just as much. Then, respectfully, from one creator to another, it is time to move on. It is time to find something else or do something else that will effectively do more for yourself and feel more fulfilling in a direction that you're interested in going. This isn't, again, to say that I haven't appreciated what anybody at Bungie has done for us. But it's very hard to admit that Destiny hasn't had a rather rocky road. And I think that overall, that's, in the end, what is very important to showcase and say. I always wonder where we would be at if we started with Forsaken's basic outline. If we had the way that everything was kind of put together, or the ideas on how movement are, how supers are, how everything charges and changes, I just wonder where we would be at if we had that as our basis instead of what we got with Destiny 2. Destiny will always be a year or so behind in my mind because the development cycle was put to the way that it was. But that is just my opinion on that matter, and I know that it isn't shared by everybody, and I know that some definitely liked Vanilla D2. It had its moments, especially when I look at Warmind. And speaking of Warmind actually introduced something to us that I think we needed to see more of, and thankfully we just got. The Whisper of the Worm quest was something that was absolutely out of nowhere. Nobody expected it to pop up or see anything coming from it, and it was just awesome. I never actually did cover my thoughts on that or where it ended up leading, I think, but Whisper of the Worm is probably one of the coolest little quests that I think they've come up with to date. 0 Hour is the newest hidden quest that was presented to us by Season of the Drifter, Bungie. I don't know which way to really go with this, but overall, 0 Hour has introduced something to us that's very similar to Whisper of the Worm, and it does present several different questions from one entry, from one weapon that we end up receiving from it. And you've seen it in the background this whole time because I've absolutely been enjoying having the thing again, but Outbreak Prime is back, or as they call it now, Outbreak Perfected. I really hope that we end up seeing a lot more like this, a lot more quests and inclusions and so on that we don't necessarily know too much about. I think it would have solved a lot of problems for us early on with Black Armory when we ended up having Bergusia ended up presenting to us. We all got into a tizzy about the fact that we couldn't unlock the final forge that was behind everything. Well, yeah, that was because Bungie actually talked about the fact that there was a fourth forge. What if they didn't say a thing about it? Nobody probably would have lost their minds, and everybody would have been happy to have it afterward. But that's just my perspective talking. Now as we sort of move into the Season of Opulence, or slowly kind of are getting there, I wonder if this is how Bungie wants to run their ship, and not show every little thing to us. I know this is largely how it was done in Destiny 1, and I would love to see it like that again. God, I remember the Paradox mission and how the No Time to Explain quest started. That was probably one of the coolest little extras that we ended up getting from almost anything in Taken King, I would say. There were so many of those little quests and mysteries that started to kind of crop up, or drops that you ended up getting from in or outside of the raid. I would just love to see more of that, personally. Anyway, that's your news and hot takes and where we're going with the channel, what topics are coming up next, stuff like that. I hope you guys did enjoy this a little bit. I don't know how often I'll do these, but it is nice to at least connect with you guys on a different level other than just creating these lore videos as I have been and pumping them out as quick as I have. Or at least I think it's been pretty quick considering the rest of my life and how that's going. But anyway, I'll leave things there. If you guys aren't already subscribed here to the channel, I would hope that you would do so and you found something of worth from my voice here today. If not, I at least thank you guys for listening today and hope you'll come back at another later date. I also want to point out that I've been leaving community posts on any days that I don't get to post videos, or sometimes in this case, if I can get this up tonight, then you'll have a double header in a way. But that said, if you guys check out the community posts, I'm trying to post poems or short stories, something like that, just to keep your mind thinking and think on different topics that may portray back to Destiny. Little things that I don't get to talk about all the time. And if not about Destiny, then just other topics in general. But I'll try to keep the politics and religion and everything else out of there, since I know that's not what you guys are here for. Anyway, no matter when or where you are, I'll see you next space time. Take care.